You pathetic little fool! Donald Trump's voice echoes through the halls of Congress, dripping with contempt. Jasmine Crockett, standing tall on the floor just 20 feet away, locks eyes with him. Over 70% of Americans are watching live as two titans collide over corruption, injustice, and the future of democracy. She doesn't flinch. Her voice, calm but unstoppable, cuts through the tension like a razor. For decades, Trump has dominated headlines. But today, in this chamber, every lie, every shady deal, every broken promise is under the microscope of history. Will Jasmine Crockett topple the man who has divided a nation, or will Donald Trump crush the fight for justice before it even begins? The stakes are sky high. Millions of Americans are counting on the truth, and nobody is safe from the fallout. Every word, every glare, every heartbeat matters, and it all begins now. The grand chamber of the United States Congress, usually a place of muted whispers and polished decorum, erupted into an electric tension the moment the doors swung open. Every eye in the room snapped to the two figures standing at opposite ends of the floor. On one side, Jasmine Crockett, a storm of poise and purpose, her gaze sharp enough to cut steel. On the other, Donald Trump, towering, brimming with arrogance, a man who had grown accustomed to bending the world to his will. Before a single procedural word could be uttered, Jasmine stepped forward, her heels clicking like a countdown to chaos. Her voice rang out, crystal clear, commanding every ear in the chamber. You have corrupted the offices you swore to serve. You have lied to the American people every single day, and you threaten the very foundation of our democracy. The room seemed to shudder at her words. Every senator, every representative, every journalist holding a camera leaned forward instinctively, sensing the magnitude of the moment. Trump's face twisted into a sneer so sharp it seemed capable of cutting the air. "Oh, look at you, little Miss Righteous," he barked, his tone dripping with contempt. "You think you understand power? You're nothing but a meddling little fool trying to play in the sandbox of giants." A hush fell, and then murmurs surged like an electric current. Jasmine did not flinch. Her eyes burned with an unshakable fire as she stepped closer, bridging the distance without a step faltering. "I am not here to play," she said evenly, her voice slicing through the tension. "I am here to hold you accountable, Donald Trump. Every lie, every abuse, every threat against this nation will be exposed." Trump laughed, a deep, guttural sound that reverberated off the chamber walls, but it carried no warmth, only menace. "Exposed? Ha! The people know nothing. And even if they did, your empty words couldn't scare a mouse, Jasmine." The words were barely out of his mouth when Jasmine raised a single finger, a silent yet lethal punctuation to her next line. Over 70% of Americans are watching right now, seeing the truth unfold before their eyes. They are not blind, and they are not fooled by your theatrics. Every corrupt move, every twisted scheme, it all ends today, here, in front of the world. Trump's jaw tightened, his eyes, usually flashing with the bravado of a man untouchable, now betrayed a flicker of unease. "You dare lecture me on reality?" he roared. "I have survived decades of attacks, scandals, and betrayals. You are just the latest in a long, pathetic line of dreamers who think shouting makes them heroes." A beat of tension coiled through the room like a live wire. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation, every inhale and exhale measured. Jasmine leaned slightly forward, her words deliberate, measured, but carried with the power of thunder. "And yet," she replied, her voice softening just enough to make the weight of it lethal, "here you are, on the defensive, trapped by your own actions. You can scream, threaten, belittle, but history does not care for arrogance. It only records truth, and today, every lie of yours will be illuminated." Trump's lips curled into a snarl. "Illuminated? You think your moral high ground scares me? I've fought harder men, braver men, who would have crumbled before the first hint of my wrath." Jasmine's gaze did not waver. She could feel the tension coiling tighter around her ribs, but instead of fear, it became fuel. She let the room feel it, the calm before the storm, a precise balance of poised fury. Every word she spoke was meticulously chosen to pierce, to challenge, to provoke. but never once faltering in rhythm or cadence. "You thrive on fear," she said, her voice low but crystal clear, "because you know that power without conscience is fragile. And today, in front of Congress, in front of millions watching across this nation, your fragility will be undeniable." Trump slammed a fist on the podium, rattling papers and echoing like a gunshot through the chamber. "You think a single woman can change anything here? You're a fool." "Perhaps," Jasmine admitted with a calm smile, "but even a fool armed with truth is more dangerous than a tyrant armed with lies." A gasp ran through the room. Some senators exchanged uneasy glances. Journalists' hands shook over cameras, capturing every micro-expression, every twitch, every flare of emotion. This was no ordinary session. This was war, verbal and psychological, fought not with weapons, but with conviction, wit, and sheer force of presence. Trump's voice dropped to a low, threatening growl. "You will regret this. You cannot survive the storm you're inviting, Jasmine Crockett." "And yet," she countered, "the storm has already begun. Every lie you've told, every betrayal you've committed, every injustice you've perpetrated, it all ends under the scrutiny of truth. And I will make sure it lands where it should, directly in the hearts of those you've deceived for decades." The room seemed to pulse with the electricity of their confrontation. Chairs creaked, pens paused mid-note, and even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Jasmine and Trump were locked in a battle that was more than political. It was moral, symbolic, a clash of legacies, of principles, of what justice and corruption meant in America in the year 2025. Every glance, every word, every subtle twitch of muscle carried stakes higher than legislation or political maneuvering. This was history in the making, and everyone present, everyone watching, felt it. The air was thick with anticipation, almost suffocating in its intensity, as if the room itself knew that this was not just another session, not just another fight, it was a reckoning. And so, from the very first word, the very first insult, Congress had transformed into a battleground. Not with guns, not with fists, but with words sharp as blades and wills unbending. Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump faced off, and the nation held its breath, watching the titanic struggle unfold, knowing that no one could look away. Jasmine straightened her shoulders and reached for the stack of documents she had brought, each one a carefully curated testament to decades of corruption, manipulation, and blatant disregard for the law. The chamber fell silent as she began to speak, her voice cutting through the lingering echoes of Trump's last sneer. "Let me be unequivocally clear," she said, her eyes locking on Trump like twin lasers. "These are not accusations born from political rivalry. These are facts, records, financial documents, sworn testimonies that prove a pattern of unlawful activity and abuse of power. You, Donald Trump, have repeatedly violated the laws meant to protect the very people you swore to serve." She slid the first folder across the polished mahogany podium. Every journalist leaning over their cameras captured the moment. Receipts, bank statements, emails, and signed affidavits spread out like evidence in a courtroom drama. The air became almost tangible, thick with the weight of truth pressing down on the chamber. Trump's face tightened, a flash of irritation flaring across his usually confident expression. "Oh, come on," he barked, waving a dismissive hand as if swatting away a bothersome insect. "You call that proof? Anyone can scribble papers, claim lies, and call it evidence. I've seen better attempts from school children trying to win a debate." Murmurs swept through the room, some incredulous, some anxious. Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward slightly, a predator in calm focus. "This is the reality of your actions, Mr. Trump," she said, her tone deliberate, measured, but carrying the force of a sledgehammer. "And every piece of evidence here can be independently verified. Every signature, every transaction, every misleading public statement is documented and undeniable." Trump's response came quickly, almost like a whip. "Undeniable? You think you've got me trapped? I've survived scandals, lawsuits, and investigations that would have destroyed a dozen people." His voice rose, echoing off the chamber walls, punctuated by snorts of derision. "You're a fool to think some papers on a desk can touch me." The chamber shook, not from physical force, but from the intensity of the verbal volley. Chairs shifted, pens stopped mid-note, and cameras recorded every nuance. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with unwavering determination. She could feel the tension snapping around them, the collective heartbeat of the nation, and she knew one misstep could either unravel her argument or magnify her power. She took a breath, measured and deliberate, then laid down the second folder, heavier, more damning. "These are internal communications," she said, her voice a controlled blade. "Emails, texts, and memos showing attempts to manipulate policy for personal gain, to suppress oversight, to silence whistleblowers. And yet you continue to deflect, to insult, to lie, ignoring the consequences of your own actions." Trump slammed his palm against the podium, rattling documents and papers, his face red with fury. "You think this impresses anyone? This isn't a court of law, Crockett. I've got influence, I've got allies, and I've got the truth about politics that you will never understand." Every syllable seemed designed to provoke, to intimidate, but Jasmine remained immovable. She lifted a final folder, heavier than the rest, containing financial records that revealed decades of questionable dealings, shell companies, and unexplained transfers. "The truth is not about influence," she said, her voice carrying across the room with a resonance that silenced even Trump for a brief, shocking moment. "It is about accountability, and today, in front of Congress and millions watching live, you will be held to that standard." Trump's lips twisted in a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "Held to standards?" he barked. "I've built empires, made deals bigger than your imagination, and you think a few documents will topple me? You're delusional." The chamber trembled with the force of words now. Not the kind of trembling that comes from physical motion, but the quaking of conscience, of authority, of history watching its players in real time. Every senator's eyes flicked between the folders, between the expression on Jasmine's face and the flailing confidence of Trump. The tension was a living entity, pressing against every wall, every observer, every unspoken expectation. Jasmine's next words were a calm hammer. "Delusional, Mr. Trump. Perhaps. But delusion does not protect you from evidence. It does not protect you from history, and it certainly does not protect you from the judgment of a nation that is no longer willing to be deceived." Trump opened his mouth to retort, then paused, a brief hesitation that spoke louder than any words. For the first time, the veneer of unshakable arrogance faltered, just a fraction, before he lashed out again, his voice low, venomous, but with a tremor now creeping in. I've seen stronger opposition, Crockett. You're bold, I'll give you that. But boldness isn't enough. You're playing with fire you cannot contain." Jasmine allowed herself the faintest smile, one of quiet triumph hidden beneath composure. "Then let the fire illuminate the truth," she said, placing the final folder firmly on the podium. "Because that is what history will remember. Not the intimidation, not the threats, but the facts, laid bare for all to see." The room shuddered with the resonance of her words. Every gasp, every scribble, every flash of a camera captured a moment of raw, historical gravity. Trump's hands clenched, veins taut along his forearms, as he scanned the documents like a man confronting ghosts from his own past. The verbal duel had escalated into a legal and moral showdown, a clash not of rhetoric alone, but of evidence, integrity, and the immutable power of truth. By the time Jasmine stepped back, letting the weight of the evidence settle visibly across the chamber, even the most jaded politicians could feel the shift. The battleground had changed. Words were no longer mere weapons. They were judgments. Every document, every folder, every undeniable fact now pressed against the armor of arrogance. And for the first time, Donald Trump appeared vulnerable, at least for a fleeting, historic moment. The nation watched, collectively holding its breath, as Congress became a stage for justice itself, and Jasmine Crockett emerged not just as a challenger, but as a harbinger of accountability, a storm the likes of which the country had not seen in decades. As her voice rang out, unwavering, cameras in every corner of the chamber transmitted the confrontation live to millions of homes across the United States. Screens flickered in living rooms, diners, nursing homes, and even bars, capturing every glare, every gesture, every calculated pause. Social media erupted within seconds. Hashtags supporting Jasmine skyrocketed, trending nationwide. By midday, over 12 million posts referencing her courage flooded platforms, and sentiment polls indicated an overwhelming surge of public support for her cause. The air outside Congress was electric, thick with anticipation, outrage, and hope. Finally, muttered an elderly teacher in Ohio, eyes glued to her tablet. Someone is standing up to him. Someone is saying what we've all been too scared to speak. Meanwhile, Trump, accustomed to controlling the narrative, went into full defensive mode. His team of aides and loyalists swarmed the corridors outside the chamber, whispering urgent directives, arranging calls, sending messages to sway hesitant senators. He leaned back in his chair, the veneer of composure cracking ever so slightly. Every eye contact with Jasmine was a silent duel. Every gesture she made a calculated challenge to his authority. He gestured toward a cluster of moderate legislators, his voice low and dangerous. They don't understand what's coming, he warned them, each word loaded with threat. If you side with her, you're risking everything. Your career, your reputation, everything you've built. Think carefully. Inside, Jasmine seemed almost untouched by the swirling storm around her. She felt the pressure, yes, the weight of the cameras, the millions watching, the politicians whispering behind closed doors, but she harnessed it, transforming it into a laser-like focus. Her calm, deliberate movements contrasted starkly with Trump's unpredictable flares of anger, and that calm became a weapon of its own. She stood tall, taking a breath before addressing the chamber again, her voice now carrying beyond the confines of Congress itself, almost as if she could speak directly to every living room, every citizen glued to their screens. You can try to intimidate, you can attempt to manipulate, but the power of truth is unshakable, she said. Her gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on every key figure. Every American has the right to know. Every citizen has the right to demand accountability, and no amount of threats can silence that. Not now, not ever. The journalists scrambled to capture every detail, their fingers flying over keyboards, live streams cutting from one angle to another. Every subtle twitch on Trump's face, every subtle exhale from Jasmine, every flash of cameras documenting the folders and evidence, these moments became viral within seconds. Clips of Trump's sneers and Jasmine's unwavering stare were shared across millions of devices, dissected, analyzed, and commented upon in real time. Public outrage intensified as commentators highlighted decades of unchecked behavior juxtaposed with Jasmine's steadfast presence. Trump, sensing the tide of public opinion turning against him, shifted tactics. He tried to appeal to loyalty, making quiet gestures toward moderate senators, smiling at some, frowning at others, all in a complicated dance of psychological manipulation. You know me, he whispered to one hesitant legislator. I've delivered results. She's a showwoman. Don't let her words fool you. But Jasmine's presence was like a magnetic force, drawing attention and aligning support with her mission. Every statement she made, every calm, resolute step she took in that chamber, reinforced her image as a guardian of justice. The public, especially older Americans who had long watched the erosion of trust in leadership, felt a surge of validation, a sense that finally someone was confronting the entrenched power structures with both courage and proof. Outside Congress, rallies spontaneously formed, citizens holding signs that read, "Truth over tyranny, courage is contagious," and Jasmine Crockett for justice. Local news stations interrupted regular programming to cover the live feed, analyzing body language, rhetoric, and strategy. Citizens debated the confrontation passionately, many calling representatives, demanding action, and publicly expressing their support. Back inside the chamber, the pressure intensified. Trump's attempts to manipulate votes became increasingly frantic, but Jasmine remained unshaken. Her eyes never left him, and her voice never wavered. No threat, no whisper campaign, no attempt to frighten Congress will prevent the truth from coming to light, she declared. The American people are watching, they are judging, and history will remember this day, not for the theatrics, not for intimidation, but for the courage to stand up, for the clarity to expose the truth. A murmur ran through the room as some senators, previously undecided, shifted in their seats, reconsidering their allegiances. The public scrutiny, amplified by media saturation and real-time commentary, created a psychological pressure impossible to ignore. The tide of public opinion was no longer just background noise. It was an active, shaping force that influenced decisions, constrained lies, and emboldened integrity. Trump's face darkened, his usual swagger faltering under the combined force of Jasmine's composure and the unrelenting public gaze. He spat words of derision, but they felt increasingly hollow. The chamber, the cameras, the millions of viewers, they formed an invisible net of accountability, and Jasmine was at its center, unmovable, unwavering, unyielding. Every breath she took, every word she spoke, every calculated pause in her argument reinforced the pressure on him. Jasmine Crockett had transformed not only the chamber, but the entire nation into a court of moral reckoning, proving that courage, truth, and meticulous preparation could bend even the most fortified walls of deceit. By the time the session concluded its first intense hour, the story had spread across the country like wildfire. Millions of Americans, watching, sharing, discussing, felt part of something monumental, witnessing a rare spectacle where justice, evidence, and sheer moral courage challenged power in its rawest, most unapologetic form. Jasmine Crockett had not only held her ground, she had galvanized a nation, proving that public opinion, when combined with truth, could create a force even the most powerful could not easily dismiss. And as Trump recoiled under the mounting scrutiny, one thing became unmistakably clear. The court of public opinion had joined the battlefield, and Jasmine Crockett was leading the charge. A sudden hush fell over the chamber as Jasmine stepped forward again, a sleek folder clutched firmly in her hand. The room seemed to contract, every eye fixed on her, every camera lens tracking her movements like a hawk in slow motion. She opened the folder and revealed a series of documents and photographs that had never been seen before, proof so damning it seemed to thrum with electricity in the air. "These," Jasmine said, her voice low but thunderous, "are communications and contracts that expose the depth of manipulation, the hidden deals, and the exploitation that have been carried out under your administration, Donald Trump." She let her words hang, each syllable a measured blade slicing through the tension. Trump's face flickered, a storm of confusion, disbelief, and rage crossing his features in rapid succession. "What? Where did you get that? That's impossible," he stammered, the usual composure cracking under the weight of undeniable evidence. His hands trembled as he gestured wildly, knocking papers off the podium in frustration. The senators in the chamber, some longtime allies of Trump, exchanged uneasy glances. Whispers rippled through the room, like a wave spreading across a lake, subtle at first but quickly swelling into something undeniable. For the first time, doubt crept into the minds of those who had previously stood by him, and it manifested in nervous shifting, quick glances, and subtle hesitations. "You think shouting and bluster can erase this?" Jasmine continued, flipping through the documents with calm precision. "Each line here has been verified, each transaction cross-checked, every misleading statement confirmed. This isn't opinion, Mr. Trump. This is fact, and facts, unlike your rhetoric, cannot be erased." Trump's voice rose louder now, a combination of fury and panic. "You're lying. These are fabrications. You're trying to ruin me with lies, Crockett. You can't do this." He pounded his fists on the podium, rattling papers and microphones alike, his normally practiced theatrics unraveling as the reality of exposure sank in. The chamber itself seemed to vibrate with the energy of confrontation. Each gasp, each intake of breath was amplified in the charged silence. Journalists captured every reaction, every involuntary twitch, and the viewers at home held their breath as they watched a man who had built his empire on intimidation and bravado suddenly exposed, naked beneath the glare of truth. Jasmine's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the storm raging across Trump's face. She leaned slightly forward, allowing the weight of her presence to dominate the space between them. "Your allies are beginning to question you," she said softly, yet with the precision of a sniper. "They are seeing the reality behind your public showmanship. You cannot command loyalty when deception is exposed. You cannot intimidate when the truth is visible to millions. Trump let out a roar, a mix of anger and desperation that reverberated through the chamber. I built this. I made deals. I am untouchable. But even as he barked, the doubt was evident. His voice carried tremors. His gestures became more frantic, and his eyes darted toward his colleagues, silently pleading for support. Some of his closest advisors shifted in their seats, eyes narrowing as they scanned the documents Jasmine had presented. One whispered to another, a hesitant murmur, the first cracks in a foundation of unquestioned loyalty. The realization that Trump might not be invincible was spreading like wildfire, igniting uncertainty that no amount of shouting could contain. Jasmine allowed herself a slight, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging the subtle shift in the room. She turned her attention back to Trump, voice steady, unwavering, carrying both authority and moral force. Every lie, every hidden agreement, every attempt to manipulate and deceive has been documented. You may scream, you may insult, you may try to intimidate, but you cannot hide from the truth. And the truth is standing here, in front of the nation, unflinching, undeniable, unstoppable. Trump's face contorted, veins pulsing at his temples as he tried to form another rebuttal. Words failed him, replaced by stammering protests and increasingly incoherent threats. The more he roared, the more transparent his panic became, and the more the chamber, the cameras, and the millions of viewers at home sensed that the tide had irrevocably turned. Jasmine flipped the folder one last time, revealing the most incriminating document yet. A contract implicating Trump in a web of backroom dealings that had previously escaped scrutiny. The room went silent, a collective intake of breath echoing through Congress. Even the journalists, trained to remain detached, felt the gravity of the moment, their fingers frozen over record buttons, eyes wide. This, Jasmine said, holding the contract for all to see, is the culmination of decades of deception, obstruction, and abuse. And yet here you stand, denying, shouting, deflecting, because the truth is always the one thing you cannot control. Trump's response was almost animalistic, a growl, a series of incoherent shouts, slamming the podium, gesturing wildly, trying to regain control he no longer possessed. But Jasmine remained still, an anchor of certainty amidst the chaos. She let the silence settle briefly, allowing the undeniable weight of her revelations to press upon every observer, every senator, every viewer watching live. The murmurs of doubt among Trump's allies grew louder, a subtle chorus of uncertainty that no threat could silence. His usual aura of dominance faltered, leaving a man cornered by exposure and public scrutiny, grappling with the one thing he could not conquer, unvarnished truth. And in that charged electric moment, Jasmine Crockett stood unwavering, a living embodiment of accountability, showing the nation, and even Trump himself, that the carefully hidden corners of power could be illuminated, and that deception, no matter how deeply buried, could never escape the relentless light of truth. Trump's eyes narrowed as he scanned the chamber, calculating, plotting. The documents, the evidence, the growing murmurs of doubt among his allies. It was a battlefield he had not fully anticipated. He realized that brute force, bluster, and anger alone would not suffice. The strategy needed to change. He needed to divide, to confuse, to reclaim control over the minds and loyalties of the legislators surrounding him. He leaned forward, voice low but charged with subtle menace, speaking to select senators who had so far remained undecided. "You must understand what's at stake," he said, each word precise, dripping with calculated threat. "If you side with her, the repercussions will be severe. Your career, your influence, your reputation. Think carefully. Alliances are fragile, and she is not invincible." The room seemed to hold its breath as some legislators shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. Trump's presence carried an intoxicating mix of charisma and intimidation, enough to make even the staunchest allies hesitate, weighing the consequences of their choices. He began promising subtle perks, unspoken favors, career advantages, and potential committee positions, offering a tangled web of incentives designed to fracture unity among the undecided. But Jasmine Crockett remained poised, her calm like a countercurrent to Trump's storm. She leaned slightly forward, letting her presence fill the space, her gaze sweeping over the room like a lighthouse scanning turbulent seas. "The only incentive that matters," she said, voice steady and precise, "is truth. The only consequence that should influence your decision is justice. Consider not what you might gain in personal advantage, but what you might lose by ignoring the law, by supporting deceit and corruption." Her words hit like a hammer, precise and unyielding. Senators who had once been firmly aligned with Trump found themselves second-guessing, caught between loyalty and integrity, influence and conscience. The careful balance of power that Trump had relied on for decades began to quiver under her reasoning, as she laid bare not just the facts, but the moral imperative behind them. Trump's frustration was palpable. He slammed a fist on the podium, the sound echoing like thunder through the chamber, rattling microphones and papers alike. "You think morality will save you?" he shouted, voice rising, sharp and jarring. "This is politics. Power is won through influence, not virtue. You cannot bend this chamber to your will with speeches and documents." Jasmine's expression remained calm, almost serene, but her words were daggers. "Politics without integrity is tyranny disguised in ceremony," she said. "You cannot coerce conscience, and you cannot manipulate the truth. Those who have been loyal to deception are beginning to see that their allegiance is based on fear and false promises, not fact or principle." The tension in the room was palpable. Every chair seemed to creak under the weight of expectation. Every pen paused mid-note, every camera lens fixed in relentless observation. Trump's allies, once steadfast, began to exchange subtle glances, hesitation replacing certainty. The public, still watching live, sensed the shift. Social media feeds flooded with commentary. "Jasmine holds the line. Trump's allies are wavering. This is turning into a moral reckoning." Trump's attempts to regain control became more frantic. He tried to appeal to fear, whispering threats and warnings in rapid succession, pacing the floor like a predator trapped in its own den. "Do you really want to gamble your careers, your influence, on untested accusations? Think carefully. The consequences will follow you for decades." Yet Jasmine's strategy was surgical, her timing impeccable. She allowed the silence to hang for a heartbeat before speaking again, each word deliberate, each pause weighted. "The consequences have already begun, Donald," she said softly, the calmness of her tone amplifying the power of her message. "By ignoring justice, by hiding behind intimidation, by manipulating your allies, you have already sown the seeds of accountability. History is watching. Your choices today will define you forever, and every senator present knows that truth cannot be ignored indefinitely." A ripple of reaction spread through the chamber. Senators shifted, some nodding subtly, some scribbling notes. Trump's calculated promises began to lose their effectiveness as the moral gravity of Jasmine's words settled into the consciousness of those present. The tension in the air became almost unbearable, like a taut wire stretched to its limit, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Trump's voice escalated, but his arguments were increasingly disjointed, less persuasive, more reactive than strategic. "You're manipulating them," he barked, gesturing wildly. "You're trying to control their minds with speeches and theatrics. That's not power." Jasmine held her ground, voice steady, unwavering. "Power without truth is fleeting, Donald. Influence built on lies is brittle. What you call strategy is nothing more than desperation. And desperation cannot withstand clarity, cannot withstand the scrutiny of conscience, cannot withstand the tide of public judgment that has already begun to turn." By the end of the session, the chamber was taut with tension, every member aware that this battle was far more than political maneuvering. It was a contest of wills, of moral authority, of history itself. Jasmine Crockett had shifted the battlefield, transforming it from a war of intimidation into a confrontation defined by reason, evidence, and principle. Trump's allies were no longer blindly loyal. Hesitation crept in, subtle but undeniable. The strings he had once pulled effortlessly now seemed frayed, vulnerable to the precision of Jasmine's arguments. And throughout it all, Jasmine remained the calm eye of the storm, orchestrating a strategy that leveraged not fear, but clarity, truth, and moral authority. As the chamber adjourned for a brief recess, the air remained electric. Every glance exchanged, every whispered word, every heartbeat carried the weight of the battle still unfolding. The nation, millions of eyes glued to screens, sensed that something unprecedented was occurring. A struggle not merely for power, but for the conscience of a country, with Jasmine Crockett leading a charge that could redefine the very meaning of accountability. When the session resumed, the atmosphere was charged with an almost tangible tension. Trump's entrance was marked by a heavy, deliberate stomp, his usual air of controlled dominance replaced by raw, unfiltered fury. Eyes darted toward him as he slammed his hand on the central podium, rattling documents and microphones alike. The sound echoed like gunfire through the chamber, silencing murmurs instantly. "You think this circus will continue unchecked?" Trump bellowed, his voice booming across the room. "You, Crockett, and all of you so-called lawmakers, you will pay for this audacity. I will not be humiliated, I will not be undermined, and I will not allow this theater to continue." Senators flinched, some instinctively shifting in their seats. But Jasmine Crockett remained poised, unflinching. Her eyes met his, a calm storm that belied the electric tension crackling around them. "Mr. Trump," she said, voice steady, measured, "audacity is not a crime. Justice is not a threat. And no amount of yelling, pounding, or intimidation can obscure the truth that stands before you and the nation." Trump's face contorted with frustration. He pounded the podium again, louder this time, a forceful percussion that seemed almost desperate, as if trying to drum the facts out of existence. "You will regret this. You will see consequences like you've never imagined. Congress, heed me. You cannot let this continue." But Jasmine's calmness was unshakable. She leaned slightly forward, letting her voice cut through the chaos like a scalpel. "The consequences, Mr. Trump, are already unfolding," she said, her words precise, deliberate, and searingly sharp. "Your threats are empty without foundation. Your rage cannot rewrite facts, and your attempts to intimidate those around you will only reveal the fragility of your position." The chamber seemed to vibrate with the intensity of their confrontation. Senators leaned forward, caught in the gravitational pull of the duel. Trump's usual air of authority was faltering. Each shout, each gestured warning, now felt like a frantic attempt to reclaim control, slipping inexorably away. Jasmine's calm precision acted like a counterweight, each argument a carefully timed strike that left him increasingly unbalanced. "You think words alone can bind a nation?" Trump roared, voice trembling despite his volume. "You think you can destroy me with speeches and papers? I have built empires. I have controlled fortunes. And you, Crockett, you dare challenge me here?" "I am not challenging you, Mr. Trump," Jasmine replied, her tone measured yet laced with undeniable authority. "I am holding you accountable. I am reminding this chamber, and the millions of Americans watching, that power without integrity is fleeting. Influence built on deceit collapses under scrutiny. Your empires may be vast, but they are not immune to truth." Gasps echoed through the chamber as senators felt the weight of her words. Trump's allies, previously steadfast, began to shift subtly in their seats, doubt creeping into their expressions. Some whispered to one another, others exchanged quick, uncertain glances, a visible fracturing of loyalty. The tension was palpable, like a tightly wound spring stretched to its breaking point, ready to snap at any misstep. Trump's response was an almost primal mixture of rage and desperation. He shouted, gestured wildly, even attempted to point fingers at legislators who had begun to waver. "You're fools! You are betraying everything we've built. Listen to me, or suffer the consequences." His voice carried threats, but now they sounded hollow, a reflection of a man losing control rather than wielding power. Jasmine did not falter. Each retort was measured, precise, slicing through his bluster with clarity and authority. "The only betrayal here," she said, voice calm but sharp, "is betrayal of justice, betrayal of truth, and betrayal of the people who entrusted you with responsibility. Your attempts to frighten Congress cannot erase the evidence, cannot erase history, and cannot erase the conscience of this nation." The chamber seemed suspended in time. Every movement, every breath, every flicker of expression was amplified in significance. Senators leaned forward, caught between the force of Trump's desperation and Jasmine's unyielding calm. Journalists scrambled to capture each nuance, their fingers flying across keyboards, microphones amplifying every inflection. Social media erupted in real time, hashtags trending within minutes. Waksha Crockett vs. Trump, Kanasha, truth over power, Itasha, Congress under fire. Trump's gestures grew increasingly erratic, pounding the podium, waving documents, pointing accusingly. His voice rose and fell, ranging from anger to panic, from threats to incredulity. But Jasmine, still calm, continued to counteract each move with precision. She used logic as her weapon, fact as her shield, and moral authority as her armor. Every statement of his aggression became an opening for her clarity. Every misstep a reinforcement of her dominance in this verbal battlefield. By the midpoint of the session, the room had transformed. The verbal sparring between Trump and Jasmine was no longer just a spectacle. It was a crucible. Senators, caught in the collision of rage and reason, could feel the stakes. Every decision, every glance, every whispered aside carried weight. The nation watched, riveted, as a masterclass in confrontation, strategy, and moral courage unfolded before them. Trump's last roar of the hour echoed into silence as Jasmine concluded another sharp, piercing point, her calm and precision contrasting his unbridled fury. The chamber was charged, electric, taut as a wire ready to snap. Every heartbeat, every gaze, every murmur of approval or hesitation contributed to the climax of a battle that was far from over, but whose momentum had undeniably shifted. In that charged room, it was clear. The struggle had reached its apex. Trump's fury had collided with Jasmine's unwavering resolve, and Congress, the nation, and history itself were witnesses to a confrontation that would echo for decades to come. As the chaos swirled, Jasmine Crockett seized a moment of opportunity. She noticed the subtle tells, the twitching of Trump's fingers, the almost imperceptible flinch when certain words were mentioned, the tension tightening across his jaw. She understood the psychology behind the bluster and fury, and in that instant, she knew exactly how to turn his own energy against him. Leaning slightly forward, Jasmine allowed her gaze to sweep the room slowly, letting every legislator, every aide, every journalist feel the weight of her scrutiny. Then, softening her voice just enough to draw attention, she said, "Mr. Trump, you speak of loyalty and power, but let me ask you, how can loyalty exist in fear? How can power endure when it is built upon uncertainty?" Trump's hands froze mid-gesture. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, the usual torrent of words faltering as Jasmine's words sunk in. There was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a crack in the armor of confidence he had always projected. The chamber responded instantly. Senators exchanged glances, some leaning forward, some whispering to their neighbors. The seed of uncertainty Jasmine had planted began to grow, subtle but unmistakable. For the first time, Trump's allies hesitated, their loyalties no longer unquestioned, their minds grappling with the idea that fear alone could not dictate action. "You see," Jasmine continued, voice deliberate and controlled, "power that relies solely on intimidation is temporary. Influence that ignores truth is fragile, and alliances built on compliance, rather than conviction, will fracture when confronted with reality." A murmur ran through the room. Even some of Trump's closest confidants shifted uneasily, recognizing the unspoken truth in her statements. The documents, the live broadcasts, the public's gaze, it all coalesced into a pressure that even the most hardened strategist could not fully withstand. Trump, sensing the shift, attempted to regain control. He gestured wildly, pounding the podium again, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. "You are twisting words. You are trying to manipulate perceptions. This is politics, Crockett. You cannot corner me with logic." But Jasmine's response was surgical, her voice a scalpel cutting through his chaos. "I am not cornering you, Mr. Trump. I am revealing what is already there. The cracks in your narrative, the inconsistencies in your record, the hesitation in those who once blindly followed you. They were always present. You just refused to see them. The room seemed to tighten around them. Every word Jasmine spoke drew the audience in, creating a tension so palpable it could almost be felt physically. Trump's usual theatrics, once commanding attention, now appeared reactive, defensive, almost erratic. The contrast between his volatility and her composure was stark, a visual and auditory representation of a battle not of brute strength, but of intellect and strategic precision. She paused briefly, letting the silence stretch. The senators leaned in, some nodding imperceptibly, others scribbling notes, aware that history was unfolding in real time. Jasmine then pressed the point further, exploiting the psychological pressure she had carefully built. You threaten, you shout, you attempt to fracture unity. But what happens when your allies realize that the foundation of your power is unstable? What happens when fear gives way to reason? Trump's face darkened. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then attempted a new strategy, gesturing toward his allies in the hope of rallying them. Do you really want to gamble your careers, your influence, on her theatrics? On her manipulation? His voice trembled slightly, betraying the uncertainty Jasmine had so deftly induced. Jasmine did not flinch. Her gaze swept the room, locking eyes with each key figure, ensuring that her message landed. This is not manipulation, Mr. Trump. This is clarity. This is accountability. And it is your inability to face the truth that leaves you vulnerable. The effect was immediate. Whispers grew louder. Senators who had once nodded obediently at Trump's every word now exchanged furtive looks. The carefully constructed loyalty that had seemed unshakable began to fray. The public, millions watching live, could sense the shift, the emperor's aura of invincibility faltering under the precision of Jasmine's strategic brilliance. Trump's attempts to regain composure grew increasingly desperate. He shouted, gestured, and tried to intimidate, but Jasmine remained a constant, unyielding force. Each of her responses, perfectly timed, highlighted the gaps in his logic, the inconsistencies in his record, and the fragility of his control. By the end of the session, the chamber was in a state of controlled chaos. Trump's frustration had reached a fever pitch, yet Jasmine's strategic precision had subtly shifted the balance. Allies who had once been unquestioning supporters now wavered, weighing their positions carefully, their hesitation palpable. The tension was so thick it could almost be measured, each moment charged with anticipation and suspense. Jasmine Crockett had achieved a masterstroke. By understanding the psychology of her opponent, by exploiting his vulnerabilities, and by maintaining unshakable composure, she had turned the tide of the battle. Trump, powerful as he was, had been maneuvered into a corner not by force, but by intelligence, strategy, and moral authority. The nation, millions watching, felt the weight of every decision, every pause, every pointed remark. And as the chamber adjourned for the next break, one truth was undeniable. Jasmine had not only withstood the fury of a titan, she had skillfully turned it against him, setting the stage for consequences that would reverberate far beyond the walls of Congress. When the session reconvened, the air was taut, electric, heavy with anticipation. Jasmine Crockett rose, her posture commanding yet composed, her gaze sweeping across the room like a lighthouse cutting through fog. The murmurs of senators and aides quieted almost instinctively. The cameras focused, broadcasting every moment to a nation holding its collective breath. She placed a single folder on the podium, a symbolic gesture that drew every eye. Then, with unwavering calm, she began, "Mr. Trump, the American people deserve to know the full scope of your actions. Congress deserves clarity, and today I will present the evidence that proves beyond doubt the extent of your misconduct." Trump's face contorted, a mixture of fury and disbelief. He opened his mouth intending to interrupt, but Jasmine's next words cut through before he could form a complete thought. "This is not political theater, Mr. Trump. This is accountability. And for the first time, the truth will not be deflected by shouting, by intimidation, or by evasion." She lifted the first document with precise, deliberate motion, letting the gravity of the evidence speak for itself. Contracts, communications, financial records, all meticulously verified, all linked directly to actions that betrayed the trust of the American people. Jasmine laid each piece before Congress like a series of sharp, unrelenting strikes, each one chipping away at the veneer of power Trump had relied upon for decades. Trump, sensing the intensity of the moment, attempted to regain control. He rose, voice booming, pounding the podium as if the force of his gestures could obliterate the mounting evidence. "You are fabricating. You are deceiving. You cannot accuse me with these lies." But Jasmine remained calm, her words surgical, her delivery unflinching. "These are not lies, Mr. Trump. They are facts, verified, documented, and undeniable. You may shout, you may threaten, you may attempt to intimidate Congress, but the truth will stand. And today it will be laid bare for every American to witness." The chamber vibrated with tension. Senators shifted in their seats, leaning forward, whispers of uncertainty spreading like wildfire. Some of Trump's most loyal allies, previously unshakable, now hesitated, glancing nervously at the growing pile of evidence. The public, millions watching live, could feel the shift in real time. The once untouchable figure, now increasingly surrounded, cornered by facts and moral scrutiny. Jasmine moved through the evidence methodically, presenting each revelation with precision. "These documents," she said, lifting another folder, "detail transactions, communications, and decisions that compromise the integrity of the office you once held. They reveal patterns of manipulation, obstruction, and self-interest that cannot be ignored." Trump's attempts to interrupt grew frantic, his voice rising in desperation. "You are lying. This is a witch hunt. Congress cannot let this happen." He gestured wildly, pointing at allies, hoping to rally them to his side. But hesitation rippled through the room. Some of those closest to him exchanged worried glances, their certainty shaken, the illusion of invulnerability slipping further away. Jasmine's delivery was flawless. She leaned slightly forward, voice steady, eyes locking with both Trump and the chamber. "You may believe intimidation protects you. You may believe loyalty can be bought or coerced. But truth and justice cannot be silenced by threats. You are not above the law. You are not beyond accountability. And today you are reminded that the nation is watching and history will remember." The impact was immediate. The murmurs became audible, senators whispering to one another, the tension almost physically pressing down on Trump. His face reddened with anger and frustration, but no amount of shouting could negate the mounting evidence, the visible cracks in loyalty and the undeniable weight of public scrutiny. Trump's eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking support, but the room no longer moved in sync with him. Jasmine had deftly turned his own tactics against him. The intimidation, the threats, the theatrics, all now underscored his isolation rather than his control. The chamber, once seemingly dominated by his presence, now bore witness to the reversal of power, orchestrated with surgical precision by Jasmine Crockett. With each piece of evidence she presented, the pressure mounted. Senators began to murmur in quiet astonishment. Whispers of doubt became murmurs of concern, and concern escalated into visible hesitation. Trump's fury, once a source of dominance, now appeared as reactive panic, his words failing to sway even his closest allies. Finally, Jasmine placed the last folder on the podium, the cumulative weight of her revelations undeniable. She looked directly at Trump, voice calm but searing. "This is the culmination of decades of scrutiny, the exposure of decisions made for self-interest rather than the public good. You can shout, threaten, and rail against the chamber, but the facts speak louder than any words of denial. Today, accountability has been presented in its entirety, and history will judge accordingly." The chamber erupted, not in applause but in stunned acknowledgement. Trump's frustration boiled, but the tide had shifted irrevocably. Allies who had once followed without question now whispered among themselves. Uncertainty etched into their faces. The nation, millions glued to screens, collectively exhaled, witnessing a moment in history where courage, precision, and moral clarity overcame bluster and intimidation. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett had delivered the decisive strike. She had taken the culmination of evidence, the weight of public scrutiny, and her own unwavering resolve to orchestrate a confrontation that left Trump exposed, isolated, and powerless in the face of undeniable truth. And as the cameras captured the stunned reactions throughout the chamber, one realization became impossible to ignore. The course of accountability had been set, and no force of anger or intimidation could reverse it. But Trump was not one to surrender quietly. His mind raced, searching for openings, strategies, anything that could restore the dominance he had long wielded. He rose from his seat, voice booming with a renewed, if desperate, confidence. "You think this ends here?" he shouted, eyes blazing. "I will not be defeated by theatrics and documents. Congress, look carefully. She is spinning narratives, manipulating perception, trying to rewrite history itself." The chamber stiffened. Some senators leaned in, anxious to see if Trump's fury could reclaim even a fraction of its former power. But Jasmine had anticipated his reaction. Every move, every outburst had been calculated, foreseen, and countered before it could fully materialize. She remained poised, her calm a foil to his escalating desperation. Trump's allies attempted to rally, trying to voice support, to shout over Jasmine, but their hesitancy betrayed them. Many had begun to question what they had once accepted without thought. Their loyalty, once assumed unshakable, now wavered under the weight of undeniable evidence and the unrelenting clarity of Jasmine's logic. The room, which had earlier trembled with tension, now felt like a scale tipping irreversibly. Jasmine seized the moment, her voice measured, precise, and commanding. "Mr. Trump, your attempts to dominate the narrative are transparent. The evidence you hope to obscure is now in full view. Your tactics of intimidation, manipulation, and fear have been laid bare. Every senator, every journalist, every American watching knows the truth, and the truth cannot be undone by volume or fury." The cameras captured every reaction. Trump's face twisted with disbelief, a mix of anger, frustration, and panic. His words grew more erratic, each shout more desperate than the last. "This is unfair. You cannot, Congress cannot allow this," he bellowed, pounding the podium in a futile attempt to reclaim attention and authority. But Jasmine had already turned the tide. She anticipated his every argument, every diversion, every attempt at theatrical deflection. With surgical precision, she dismantled his claims, countering with verified evidence, historical precedent, and moral reasoning. Every word she spoke chipped away at the illusion of control he had maintained for so long. Whispers began to ripple through the chamber. Senators who had once been steadfast supporters of Trump now exchanged anxious glances. Some coughed, some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, all signaling a growing recognition that the foundation of their allegiance was crumbling. The public, millions watching live, felt the shift. Social media erupted with commentary and analysis. Trump's allies are wavering. Jasmine Crockett holds the chamber. The tide of accountability is unstoppable. Trump tried again, this time appealing to loyalty and fear. "You cannot betray me. All of you must stand firm. She is misleading you." His voice carried threats, promises, and frustration in equal measure. Yet the impact was diminished. Hesitation had already spread. The uncertainty he feared most had begun to take root. Jasmine's response was calm, unwavering, almost surgical in its precision. Loyalty without integrity is not loyalty. It is complicity. Fear is not leadership. And no amount of shouting or threats can mask actions that betray public trust. Today, the American people are watching, and history is watching, and neither will be deceived. As her words settled over the chamber, the dynamic shifted decisively. Trump's allies wavered openly, some lowering their eyes, others whispering urgent exchanges. The evidence he had hoped to suppress now dominated every conversation. The narrative he had relied upon, constructed over decades, was unraveling in real time. The press seized upon the moment. Cameras zoomed in on reactions, reporters whispered urgent updates, and journalists across the country began piecing together the story. Headlines flashed online. Trump cornered in Congress. Crockett exposes president's misdeeds. Allies hesitate as evidence mounts. The momentum was unmistakable. Public opinion, once a backdrop, had now become a decisive force in the chamber. Trump's gestures grew increasingly erratic. He pointed, he waved, he shouted, but each action now underscored his isolation rather than strength. Jasmine, calm and unwavering, countered each motion with reason, fact, and moral authority. The contrast between fury and composure could not have been starker. The room, the nation, and history itself bore witness to a reversal that felt both inevitable and extraordinary. By the session's end, the scale had tipped. The once unassailable figure of Donald Trump had been forced onto the defensive. His allies, hesitant and questioning, no longer followed blindly. The evidence, the clarity, and the moral authority of Jasmine Crockett had reshaped the battlefield, leaving Trump exposed, his strategies unraveled, and his influence waning. The chamber buzzed with tension and awe. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle motion contributed to a sense of seismic shift. The public, millions watching from living rooms and devices across the country, sensed a turning point in history. Jasmine Crockett had not only countered every move, she had anticipated, neutralized, and transformed the battlefield in her favor. In that charged, historic moment, one thing was undeniable. The struggle for accountability had reached a decisive turning point. Trump's attempts to reclaim dominance had been met with foresight, strategy, and relentless clarity, and the tide had irrevocably turned. The nation watched, riveted, as a figure long feared for his power and influence was systematically stripped of both, leaving Jasmine Crockett standing resolute, commanding, and victorious in principle, if not yet fully in outcome. As the echoes of confrontation faded into the tense silence of the chamber, a new reality began to crystallize. Jasmine Crockett had claimed the moral high ground, and with it, a surge of political momentum that no amount of bluster or theatrics could easily counter. Her words, her poise, her unwavering dedication to truth had captured the attention not only of Congress, but of the American public. Millions of eyes glued to screens across the nation, watching her every movement, listening to every syllable with bated breath. Trump, on the other hand, was cornered. The veneer of invincibility that had once seemed unassailable was fractured, his usual arsenal of intimidation and spectacle rendered ineffective in the face of Jasmine's precision. Every gesture, every shout now seemed reactive, desperate, and ultimately futile. He attempted to muster his signature bravado, rising from his seat, pounding the podium, and gesturing wildly. But the impact was diminished. The room, the nation, and even some of his own closest allies recognized that the balance of power had shifted, if only slightly but decisively. Jasmine capitalized on the moment with calculated brilliance. She allowed a pause, letting the chamber absorb the significance of the reversal. Her eyes swept across the senators, locking gaze with those who had previously been hesitant, her voice resonating with clarity and authority. "We are at a crossroads," she said, deliberate and unwavering. "The choices we make here and now will define not only the integrity of this chamber, but the trust of the American people. History watches us, and accountability cannot be postponed." Her words landed like hammer strikes on steel. Senators who had wavered now leaned forward, the momentum of her reasoning impossible to ignore. The media, broadcasting live, captured every subtle nod, every whispered consultation, amplifying the effect to millions more across the country. Social media erupted with commentary, hashtags trending, analysis pouring in, headlines proclaiming Jasmine's moral victory. Crockett leads charge against Trump. Public opinion swings, truth triumphs, a turning point in Congress history. Trump's attempts to regain footing became increasingly frantic. He called for loyalty, for unity, for adherence to his narrative, but the response was tepid at best. Allies who had once followed his every word without question now hesitated, glancing at one another uncertainly, realizing that the battlefield had shifted beneath their feet. Every attempt at persuasion was met with subtle resistance. Every threat met with stoic silence. And the psychological advantage had clearly swung to Jasmine Crockett. The chamber itself seemed to mirror the shift. The tension that had once been electric now carried a different energy, one of anticipation, curiosity, and a sense of inevitability. Each member of Congress, aware of the eyes of the nation upon them, understood that alignment with truth, with integrity, could no longer be postponed. Jasmine's composure contrasted starkly with Trump's escalating agitation. Each gesture, each word, reinforcing the perception that she had not only survived the storm, but had begun to direct its course. Even the press corps could not remain neutral. Analysts leaned into microphones, commentators dissected each exchange, and journalists tweeted in real time, highlighting every moment of Jasmine's precision, every hesitation from Trump, and every sign that his influence was waning. Public perception shifted palpably. Calls, messages, and social media reactions reflected admiration for Jasmine's steadfastness and growing doubt about Trump's credibility. The tide of opinion, once assumed immutable, now leaned in favor of the challenger who dared to confront power with unwavering principle. Trump's rhetoric grew increasingly erratic, a mix of defiance and desperation. His voice rose, his gestures became more extreme, and his appeals more theatrical, yet each effort underscored rather than masked the reality of his precarious position. Jasmine, in contrast, remained a model of strategic restraint. Each word was measured, each statement backed by evidence, and each pause carefully calculated to emphasize the inevitability of truth prevailing. By the conclusion of that session, the outcome was unmistakable. Jasmine Crockett had established the first real foothold of advantage. Political momentum and public support had shifted in her favor, while Trump had been driven fully onto the defensive. Allies who might have once bolstered his stance now wavered. The public increasingly aligned with the clarity of her reasoning, and the narrative of accountability had become the dominant story of the day. The cameras captured every nuance: Trump's frustration, Jasmine's calm determination, the subtle but unmistakable realignment within Congress. Across the nation, millions recognized the emergence of a new paradigm. The symbolic victory was clear. A challenger, armed with truth, strategy, and moral authority, could confront entrenched power and begin to reshape the landscape of influence. And in that moment, the air in the chamber seemed to shift irrevocably. The weight of history pressed down, reminding all present that the struggle was far from over. Yet a decisive, undeniable first victory had been claimed. Jasmine Crockett, standing tall amidst the tension, had not only survived the storm, but had begun to chart its course, leaving Trump isolated, reactive, and exposed to both political and public scrutiny. The nation watched, captivated, as the initial triumph of principle over intimidation became evident. For the first time in that epic confrontation, it was clear. The course of power had shifted, and the first decisive advantage had been seized by a force of integrity, courage, and unwavering resolve: Jasmine Crockett. Yet even in this moment of triumph, the confrontation was far from concluded. Trump, faced with mounting evidence, wavering allies, and an increasingly critical public, was forced to acknowledge the reality he had long resisted. The chamber, once a theater of his dominance, now held him accountable, and he knew that the world was watching every reaction, every gesture, every word. Rising to address the assembly, Trump's expression was a volatile mixture of defiance and frustration. His voice, sharp and wavering at times, attempted to assert authority. I am being misrepresented. This is not accurate. The facts are being twisted." Yet the evidence Jasmine had meticulously presented lay open before all, undeniable and incontrovertible. The documents, the communications, the patterns of decisions, they could not be ignored or erased. The room was tense. Each word Trump uttered weighed against the mountain of proof stacked on the podium before Jasmine. Senators exchanged glances, some lowering their eyes in disbelief, others whispering quietly among themselves. The media captured every instant, broadcasting to millions who watched from living rooms, offices, and devices across the country. The public could sense the unraveling of a carefully constructed narrative, and the once unshakable aura of power surrounding Trump seemed to fracture in real time. Jasmine, poised and deliberate, allowed the chamber a moment to absorb the gravity of the situation before speaking. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice calm but resolute, "the evidence is clear, the facts are undeniable, and the people of this nation deserve the truth. This is not about politics, it is about accountability. You can attempt to deflect, to shout, to cast blame, but the truth is unyielding, and justice demands recognition of it. Trump's attempts to rebut became increasingly frantic. He gestured wildly, his voice rising in pitch and volume. "This is a witch hunt. I am being attacked unfairly. You cannot, Congress cannot, allow this narrative to stand." Yet his words, once commanding, now sounded reactive, desperate, hollow. The chamber no longer trembled with his presence. Instead it watched, tense and critical, as his defenses crumbled under the relentless clarity of Jasmine's argument and the weight of the evidence. The public perception was immediate and irreversible. Across the nation, commentators dissected every moment, analysts debated the implications, and social media surged with reactions praising Jasmine's steadfast courage. Hashtags trended, "Crockett exposes truth," "Accountability prevails," "Trump cornered." The tide of opinion, once assumed monolithic, now decisively favored Jasmine, and Trump's denials fell on increasingly deaf ears. Within Congress, the effect was equally profound. Allies who had once rallied unquestioningly now whispered hesitantly, their support waning as they weighed the evidence against their loyalty. Some looked at one another nervously, calculating the political cost of continued defense. The energy in the chamber shifted. No longer a platform for intimidation, it had become a crucible of accountability, where truth, strategy, and moral authority dictated the flow of influence. Jasmine's strategy was impeccable. She refrained from gloating, choosing instead to focus on clarity and principle. "This moment is not the end," she said, letting her words settle over the chamber. "It is a reminder that justice requires vigilance, that integrity must be defended, and that the power of truth is stronger than the force of fear. There is still work to be done, but today we have taken a decisive step toward ensuring that the public's trust is honored, and that accountability is not a choice, but a necessity." Trump's attempts to interject became increasingly fragmented. His gestures, once commanding, now conveyed frustration and bewilderment. He tried to appeal to loyalty, to question motives, to assert dominance, but the coherence and evidence-backed delivery of Jasmine's statements left him isolated, his words increasingly ineffective. The room, the public, and even some of his own allies could see clearly the reversal of control, and the momentum had shifted irrevocably. The cameras captured every nuance: Trump's strained attempts to maintain composure, Jasmine's unshakable confidence, the subtle shifts in posture and expression of senators, and the hushed, tense energy of a chamber fully engaged in the pursuit of truth. Across the nation, millions recognized that they were witnessing a historical confrontation, a moment in which courage, integrity, and meticulous preparation overcame aggression, bluster, and denial. As the session drew to a close, the outcome was unmistakable. Jasmine Crockett had not only survived the storm of attacks, intimidation, and deception, she had turned it into a platform for transparency and principle. Trump, though still vocally resistant, was left on the defensive, exposed before both Congress and the nation. The initial victory, now cemented, was a triumph of strategy, evidence, and unwavering commitment to justice. And yet Jasmine's words reminded all present that this was not the end. There was still work to be done, still battles to be fought, still accountability to enforce. The victory, though decisive, was a step in a larger journey. The chamber, the public, and the world understood. Principle had prevailed today, but vigilance and perseverance were required to ensure it endured. In that charged, historic conclusion, Jasmine Crockett stood as the embodiment of justice tempered with resolve. The initial triumph was hers, undeniable and inspiring, and the message was clear. Truth, courage, and integrity could challenge even the most formidable power, and in doing so, reshape the course of history. The aftermath of that confrontation rippled far beyond the marble walls of Congress. Jasmine's influence surged, her name becoming synonymous with accountability, principle, and moral courage. Across the nation, millions drew inspiration from her poise, strategy, and unwavering commitment to truth. Opinion polls reflected a seismic shift. Public approval for Jasmine soared, while Trump's once formidable aura of invincibility suffered significant erosion. Headlines screamed of a new era, Crockett emerges as guardian of justice. Power meets principle in historic showdown. Trump's influence wanes amid evidence and accountability. Trump, though still vocally defiant, found his credibility chipped away piece by piece. Allies who had once rallied unquestioningly now hesitated, aware that continued support carried political risk. Even loyalists began whispering doubts, their certainty shaken by the meticulous precision of Jasmine's arguments and the magnitude of evidence she had presented. The nation watched as the man who had wielded power with aggression and bravado faced a subtle, yet undeniable decline in influence, a transformation as dramatic as it was instructive. Jasmine, however, did not allow the triumph to devolve into personal triumphalism. She remained deliberate and measured, aware that victory in principle did not equate to finality and justice. Her speeches and public statements emphasized the ongoing responsibility of citizens, legislators, and institutions to remain vigilant. Accountability, she reminded the nation, is not a single act. It is a continuous commitment. Today we have seen the power of truth, but the struggle for justice is relentless, and our duty to uphold it never ends. The story of that confrontation became a touchstone in political discourse. Universities analyzed it as a case study in strategic thinking and ethical leadership. Media outlets revisited every exchange, highlighting the contrast between intimidation and reasoned argument. Civic groups cited it as a reminder that engagement, evidence, and courage can overcome fear and manipulation. Jasmine Crockett became a symbol, a living testament to the impact one determined individual could have against entrenched power, inspiring a generation to recognize that ethical leadership is not only possible but essential. Trump, meanwhile, attempted to reclaim some narrative control, issuing statements, holding interviews, and asserting defiance. Yet each effort was met with skepticism, media scrutiny, and public doubt. The spectacle of denial, once a tool of dominance, now underscored vulnerability. His words lacked the weight they had once carried, his gestures seemed performative, and his threats increasingly rang hollow. The public perception had shifted irrevocably. A leader could no longer rely solely on rhetoric or fear to maintain influence in the face of relentless accountability. Congress, too, experienced a transformation. Members who had been passive or hesitant were now acutely aware of the scrutiny that accompanied indecision or blind loyalty. Jasmine's example reinforced a standard. Integrity, preparation, and moral courage demanded respect and often produced decisive outcomes. The chamber had borne witness to an extraordinary display of accountability in action, and its legacy would inform legislative conduct for years to come. The broader lesson resonated with millions of Americans. Citizens, long accustomed to spectacles of power, were reminded that the principles of justice and transparency could not be ignored indefinitely. The confrontation illuminated the mechanisms through which public scrutiny, evidence, and principled advocacy could converge to challenge even the most entrenched figures. Jasmine's victory, while not the conclusion of all battles, served as a vivid illustration that courage coupled with strategy could fundamentally alter the trajectory of events. And yet the narrative remained open-ended. Jasmine's triumph, though substantial, was part of a continuing journey. The fight for justice, integrity, and accountability was far from over. The challenges of governance, the persistence of corruption, and the ever-present temptation of power ensured that vigilance would remain necessary. Her message was clear. Victories are meaningful, but they are not endpoints. They are calls to action, reminders that each citizen, each legislator, and each observer bears responsibility in the ongoing struggle for fairness and truth. In the corridors of history, the encounter between Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump would be remembered not merely as a clash of personalities, but as a defining lesson in the dynamics of power, principle, and perseverance. Jasmine's conduct, her preparation, courage, and moral clarity set a precedent that echoed far beyond the walls of Congress, influencing discourse, inspiring engagement, and reminding the world that accountability is a force capable of reshaping even the most formidable structures. The public, engrossed in the unfolding drama, understood the symbolic significance. Jasmine's victory was both a personal triumph and a societal one. a demonstration that justice, once pursued with diligence and resolve, could prevail against intimidation and manipulation. Trump's diminished stature served as a cautionary tale, reinforcing the timeless lesson that power, however great, is always accountable to principle, evidence, and the vigilant gaze of the people. As the final echoes of that historic session faded, one image remained indelible: Jasmine Crockett, poised and resolute, a beacon of integrity amid chaos, reminding all who witnessed her rise that the pursuit of justice is arduous, continuous, and essential. The story closed without finality, emphasizing that while one battle had been won, the journey toward accountability and fairness stretches indefinitely, a call to courage for every citizen who dares to confront the forces that threaten truth. In that enduring moment, the nation understood a fundamental truth. Victories in the pursuit of justice are never solitary. They ripple outward, inspiring reflection, action, and an unyielding commitment to uphold the principles that define a free and fair society. Jasmine Crockett had emerged as a symbol, and the story of her confrontation with power would serve as a lasting testament. The struggle for justice is relentless, and those willing to stand for it can shape history itself. In the wake of conflict and revelation, one truth shines with enduring clarity. Courage paired with integrity can illuminate even the darkest corridors of power. Jasmine Crockett's unwavering commitment to justice reminds us that every act of honesty, every defense of truth, shapes the world in ways both profound and lasting. May her example inspire us to confront wrongdoing with clarity, to act with conscience, and to cultivate the courage to uphold what is right, so that our own choices leave the world more just, more compassionate, and more human. If this story moved you, don't scroll past. Sit with it, reflect on it, talk about it, like, comment, and share it with someone who believes that truth and justice deserve a stage. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where courage meets accountability. Hit the bell, because the next story will challenge what you thought you knew about power. This tale is a fictional dramatization inspired by real struggles for justice and the courage it takes to confront corruption. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental or symbolic to provoke reflection and conversation. Thanks for watching. Justice isn't given, it's fought for. This is Harrison Stories.